After a busy weekend protesting NATO in Chicago and the G8 in Maryland that put the shivers up the 1%, you'd imagine a bit of R&R would be in order for the 99ers. Not a chance. The parting shot from Chicago was a shutdown Boeing protest to let the high flyers know that without support from the ground up, there'd be no taking to wings. There was also the Chicago Stands Up and Teachers Union rallies to challenge the tax breaks for the rich and protest cuts to social services. But high visibility protests could not happen without a multitude of 99ers' hard work. Join us behind the scenes for organizing tips and the creative drive of art and culture vibrations. Then head back to the country for OWS at the farm. Anti-capitalista.
Andrew Faust here, permaculture designer, excited to be at the Occupy Wall Street farm up here near Woodstock.
The city of Chicago hosted NATO's summit the weekend of May 19th and 20th and was rocked by massive protests in which Occupy Chicago joined with 99ers from anti-war, veteran, union environmental, and other Occupy groups from across the U.S. Nonviolent participants were met with major repressive tactics from city, state, and federal law enforcement, including high-tech crowd control gear meant to intimidate and frighten, police brutality, and multiple arrests.
Last night, I was on the phone with a girl who was down at the protest watching an activist get run over by a police truck. I'm scared. I don't have a safe place to stay at night because there is no safe place to stay at night. They violated our privacy, they stole our security, and they terrorized our trust.
I tried to stop the Chicago Police Department van from accelerating through the crowd of protesters.
Were you the one that got run over?
I was not the one that got run over by dumb luck, because I was on the hood of the van trying to stop it. So I didn't realize how stressful that entire experience was until I got out of it on like late Monday night, and I was finally able to go home and just sleep. Like, I didn't sleep very well, but it was just I could finally power down for a minute, and yeah, it was a very intense week.
Mainstream media, for the most part, promoted the government narrative with meager and negative reports of the vibrant rallies and marches, choosing to accentuate the fraction of anarchic elements over the courageous stand of Iraq and Afghanistan military veterans and tens of thousands of citizens against the wars of the 1%. The week which followed proved that the 99ers were undaunted in their quest for peace, social, and economic justice. On Monday, Occupy Chicago marched with hundreds of supporters to the Boeing building on the Chicago River in peaceful protest of the company's role in supplying warplanes, killer drones, and other military equipment used in wars and attacks overseas. The protesters also voiced concerns about tax subsidies Boeing receives from state and federal government and pointed out layoffs of thousands of workers. Despite making a profit of $9.7 billion between 2008 and 2010, Boeing laid off almost 15,000 workers while increasing executive pay 31%. The city of Chicago, supposedly in the grip of an austerity budget, gave Boeing a 20-year property tax exemption, costing Illinois taxpayers $60 million. Once again, Occupy mounted a symbolic concrete action, highlighting a system which profits from foreign wars while citizens bear the brunt of austerity measures. Chicago continued its pivotal role with other actions during the week. The Chicago Exchange held its annual shareholder meeting May 23rd, and thousands of tax-paying 99ers, dubbed Chicago Stands Up, showed up to demand that Chicago's most profitable corporate give back state tax breaks worth over $1 billion in the next decade. More than 200 seniors, people with disabilities, home care providers, and allies blocked entrances to the CME and shut down a major intersection, protesting devastating budget cuts to programs the people rely on at a time when CME reaps record profits, subsidized by tax breaks.
What happened with the nurses and with the CME group are just more examples of social services being cut, of people not being listened to by their government, and Occupy Chicago will continue to fight for those endeavors of creating a better world wherever the opportunities present themselves. So, I mean, I'm sure some of us would have liked the CME meeting to be on a different day after we hadn't been being brutalized by the Chicago police for exercising our First Amendment rights. But unfortunately, that's not when they chose to have their meeting, and it's just boots on the ground. We're there all the time. Like, the occupation is all day, all week. It doesn't stop.
Wednesday also saw 4,000 or more members of the Chicago Teachers Union join with Occupy allies for a rally and spirited march, forming a sea of red through downtown streets. The action detailed Mayor Rahm Emanuel's efforts to impose budget cuts and contract limitations on teachers in the third largest public school system in the U.S. As educators filled the city's concrete canyons with chants, music, and cheers, Mayor Emanuel chose to attend a baseball game with his police chief, basking in public relations hype of having saved the city during the NATO summit.
OccupyChi.org, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at OccupyChicago for the latest updates and information.
Red was the color of the week. Canadian students in Quebec formed massive rivers of red marching against steep tuition hikes and a draconian law meant to squash public protests. The pots and pans marches were especially captivating. OWS in New York City and other U.S. locations staged sympathetic actions with chants of solidarity. Protests and other high-visibility tactics of the Occupy movement serve to illustrate a constant theme of another world is possible. These actions are culminations of a week of organizing and planning within a highly democratic model. The core of any Occupy group is its General Assembly meetings held regularly, in which anyone who wants to speak is able to. There are facilitators who help to moderate the meetings, but there are no leaders with authority. The complex organic model has working committees and groups who address various social and economic issues the GA decides upon. It is a sometimes frustrating, decidedly democratic process which has led to successful community outreach and result-oriented positive action across the U.S. OWS is a network committed to social change through direct action. Convergence in large-scale protests allows 99ers to form strong ties of trust and respect. The ability to mount large protests is important because it impacts political agendas. Fundamental efforts by several Occupy working groups have been just as important. Real-world projects have been initiated and are gaining ground in communities across the country, while various artists have contributed their talents to increase visibility and the fun factor. One viable project is Occupy Farms, a teaching example for sustainable farming begun in New York and New England and expanding across the nation.
Part of what we're working on here today is to look at this 56-acre property, to work with this generous family that's opened this space up for the Occupy movement to really explore what does it mean to reconnect with our heritage as human beings? What does it mean to live more cooperatively? And this is a place where we hope to really show people what can that look like? What does it look like to dance with finesse with how the earth works as we meet our deepest, most heartfelt human needs? And that's what we're doing here. So help the Occupy Farm to be a real model of what is the potential for human evolution to live well with how this earth actually works.
Originally an alliance between small farmers who rallied to send food to Occupy camps at the beginning of the movement, Occupy Farms promotes sustainable, alternative farming methods, community-supported agriculture, and addresses food insecurity. Their slogan, grow the change you want to see.
They're all rescue horses, and that's another area of interest that we find the horses to be therapeutic ourselves, and many people that have come, find a connection, and they, can go out and sit and watch the horses or be involved with the horses. And it helps them to express themselves. And there's a need for horses, like most of the horses that we have came from the auction and they were destined to go into the meat pen.
probably going to need a tractor up here. We're going to be building a machine shed. We're going to be building alternative structures for housing. We want to do an outdoor kitchen, which is going to entail a lot of tools, a lot of processing equipment. We're going to need all kinds of tools, shovels, hose. We're going to need seeds. We're going to need fruit trees, seedlings. We have a lot of work to do.
OWS has faced unchecked capitalism and a corporate-dominated state by putting their faith and hope in each other. An important ingredient in the recipe has been the contributions of artists to the movement. Arts and culture working groups were among the first formed by all General Assemblies. Creative folks, sick of making things for corporate interests or living in crisis because of a bleak economy, responded enthusiastically to the call. OWS NYC has its Puppet Guild, founded by a master puppeteer whose signature puppets have been present at many major actions. Their 12-foot Statue of Liberty puppet is recognized the world over. Artists making posters, staging street theater, playing music and writing have infused the movement with humor and captured attention. Art and culture have provided electricity and momentum to populist movements throughout history. Creative forces provide wake-up calls, fueling not only revolution, but more importantly, evolution.
I started playing that song again when I was in Europe. And I was like, okay, I'm in Europe and people are requesting a song of mine. I have to honor that. And then I was like, oh, I'm cool with that. I'll play it again. But the song goes out to Scott Olsen. Who here knows who Scott Olsen is? You know, Scott Olsen is a young Iraq veteran, was in the Marine Corps, came home, joined up with a group called Iraq Veterans Against the War, who I talked about earlier, and found himself down at Occupy San Francisco. And he was one of the folks who went over after the police violently evicted Occupy Oakland from Oscar Grant Plaza. And Scott Olsen was in the streets that night when 3,000 people marched to reclaim the park from the police. And him and my friend Joshua Shepard, they were standing there in their military uniforms in front of the police, and thinking that that might send some sort of message to the cops. And the message it sent to them was apparently distorted because they shot a beanbag round into Scott's head and broke his skull. And then people went to try to rescue him, and they shot at them too with concussion grenades and tear gas canisters and all this shit. And but they took Scott to the hospital and they got him fixed up and stuff, and he had some surgeries and whatever. And meanwhile, Occupy Oakland went, they took the park back, they built a sculpture out of the fence that they tried to build around it, which was pretty brilliant. And then they held a 3,000-person General Assembly, and they overwhelmingly agreed to shut down the Port of Oakland 10 days later. And 10 days later, they had tens of thousands of people march down and shut the Port of Oakland down. And then about a month later, they went down there and they shut the port down again because the cops, there was clearly this federally coordinated crackdown on the Occupy movement, and it came out actually this week in actual Homeland Security documents that was true, even though they denied it several times.
Mic check! Mic check! Mic check! Mic check! A brief report back! A brief report back! Of the march! Of the march! We had about 20 people arrested.
The corporate media would have you believe that the ongoing revolution in the US is the work of a shifting, shapeless mass of troublemakers in need of a good bath and lessons in personal hygiene. The demeaning terms used by the 1% to portray the 99ers are very offensive, but OWS participants must thank their lucky stars still, because only a few decades ago they would have been branded communists and would have had their lives destroyed by the rulers. The sordid business of demonization of everyday folk who dare speak out against injustices is hardly a new turn of events. The trick has been used countless times to wreak havoc on foreign countries whose resources were coveted by the ruling elite. First, demean and demonize them as subhuman, then wage war and take over their resources. The simple trick has worked for all aggressive empires. But the latest in this long tale of injustices shows the measure of desperation faced by the 1%. The Occupy protests in the US have left the rulers with a serious problem. Those out on the street calling for a different world are patriots. They are Americans from all walks of life who have served their country heart and soul, only to find that humanity itself is being betrayed by the rulers. They are no longer interested in wiping out their brothers and sisters abroad for so-called national goals. They want to save humanity and the planet from the mindless excesses of the 1%. The long US uprising for economic and social justice shows no signs of dying down, despite all the ruling elite's cruelty. However, this does not mean that the rulers are going to stop trying to put this revolution in global awakening down. From day one of street protests, the US police have been ordered to intimidate, harass, and suppress the population into submission. The rulers are not fussy about who gets a beating on America's streets. University students, professionals, and even decorated military veterans have not been spared the mace of the elite to force them back to mindless subservience to their self-defeating system. The long process of attrition has been unleashed on the folk in the US to gradually beat any notion of freedom they might hold out of them. Bit by bit and day by day, police brutality, mass arrests, unlawful detention, and harassment have been multiplied to discourage those who might merely consider taking part in one of the most important events of the 21st century, that of a leading world nation's abandonment of erroneous policies, both domestic and international. Each protest has been met with tear gas, pepper spray, baton charges, and mindless violence. Arrests have mostly been made on criminal charges, so the dissenters find it hard to seek employment afterwards. Laws such as the NDAA have been put in place to prevent the people from speaking out and having their voices heard. The right to protest has been twisted out of all shape to suit the 1%, and public venues for such outpourings of social grievances have been placed out of bounds. And yet, with each passing day, the popular resolve to do what is right by humanity is becoming stronger, and the jingoistic nationalist slogans, able in the past to send young men and women to their deaths in pointless military escapades, is dying down. So the next time you see the 99ers on the street protesting, take a longer look at who they are and what they represent. They are doctors, lawyers. They are engineers, mechanics. They are artists and students. In other words, they are the society asking for change at a crucial hour for our planet's survival. So the corporate media will have you believe that Scott Olsen, an Iraq veteran, was shot and almost killed over personal hygiene issues, if you're not careful. That Bradley Manning is a traitor for hastening the end of the slaughter of the innocents in the Iraq War, and that the millions out demonstrating worldwide are just troublemakers. No matter. Where our truths can uproot the 1%, the libel can cause us little harm. And what's worse, for the rulers, signs are appearing of the police coming round to serve and protect the very communities they have been told to crack down on. We are unstoppable because another world is possible.
And it's about sitting in the VA hospital in Southern Illinois. The person who this song about is an Iraq veteran and an anti-war activist and an awesome activist of all sorts and a great person. And they're sitting in the VA hospital the day that the Iraq War was announced to be over by Obama, and he said it was a profound moment. And they were like, yeah, it's pretty freaking profound, dude. Like, I'm going to be coming back to this VA hospital for the rest of my life because I have post-traumatic stress disorder. Great that the war is over and there's still 50,000 troops in the country, A. B, like, this hospital's full of these veterans from all these decades going back to the Korean War. And, like, how, like, what war ended for them, you know what I mean? And, like to say that a war ends is a weird thing, because in some ways, like, yes, it can end and things get better. But in another way, like, when you have a friend die, when does that end? It doesn't end. And what is war but, like, tons of people's friends dying? So, like, how's that end? It doesn't end after the funeral. That's when it gets really hard. And, like, it comes back and it comes back and it comes back. So I wrote the song about that whole deal. Because we're still involved in the longest war in U.S. history. The longest, like, official war. Well, he must have looked a hero in the eyes of many men. Forgot the souls of broken generations, and shared nods and smiles, spoke of other times, and held a grim silence that was recognized. Well, the invisibly wounded, well, they too walk these halls. They're trapped in these appointments, and the memories and pills. And long after the war is over, and the country stops paying attention, it stays with those for whom it never ended. And there's nothing profound about it at all. Well, I've seen the heart and distance, the coldness and the fear, alongside the tenderness, the love, the hope and care. Well, I've wrestled with events that are more than mere events, a big deep hole.